Hi, I'm Dirk Wheeldryer, Superintendent of Caledonia Community Schools. Thank you for your interest in this video. This is one of a three-part series that we've designed to try and provide as much information as possible to our community so that you can understand how our schools are funded and the importance of this upcoming millage election for our district. We invite you to check out all three of the videos. They're located on our website. Simply go to the website and look for the non-homestead election tab. You click on that and you will be able to find all three of them located there. And again, we invite you to watch all three of them so that you get the complete picture of why this is so important to our district. Thank you for your interest in the non-homestead operating millage renewal election, and let's get started. Well, in part two of our three-part video series, we're going to be looking at the impact of something called the Headlee Amendment. Hopefully you've watched part one of this series already. If you've done so, you know that we, in part one, looked at the basic structure of school funding as it was laid out under Michigan's Proposal A, that constitutional amendment that set up a lot of our school funding structure and is the thing that drove the necessity, the requirement for us as a school district to hold non-homestead operating millage elections. So in that video, we went through quite a few things, and again, hopefully you've watched that already, but here are just a few reminders of some of the stuff we covered in that video. First of all, that this election is required for us under state law, and that it has to do with operating millage. An important point to make is that that's different than, separate than bond elections. Bond elections are to raise money to build things. Operating millage is what enables us to have the money to run our school budget each year. And so this is two totally separate things. This is, again, what we have the election coming up is the non-homestead operating millage election. So homestead property is unaffected by this request. Homestead property, of course, is your primary residence. It only impacts those things that are termed non-homestead properties. So those include things like rental properties, second homes, vacation homes, factories, businesses, warehouses, those sorts of properties. The maximum amount that can actually be levied is 18 mills, no matter what the authorized amount is, and that's an element we're going to be talking about here in this video so you understand a little bit more what that means. And then, of course, something we spent a lot of time on was that the district must levy the 18 mills to get our full per-student funding. If the voters were not to authorize the 18 mills, we would lose $15.6 million, or 22% of our operating budget, which would have devastating effects for our district. We left off with a chart showing that this is not something new. This process goes back all the way back to 1994, and the millage, this chart shows you the millage that's been levied by Caledonia ever since 1994 on non-homestead properties. And so you can see this is something that's been happening for 30 years. There is one little area that I drew your attention to as kind of a cliffhanger at the end of part one, and that's these two little bars over here, where you see just not quite getting to that red line, and that's due to something called a Headlee rollback. And so we want to talk about that just a little bit because that will be something that's going to be playing into the ballot request. Just before we leave this chart, just want to draw your attention to this red line. This is that 18 mills that we are required to levy, and as you can also see, we cannot levy more than that. You see nowhere in here are we allowed to go over that 18 mills, and that's going to be important as we talk about how we address this Headlee situation over here. So let's get into that just a little bit. The Headlee Amendment was another amendment to Michigan's Constitution. It was passed way back in 1978, and that's really had a big impact on property taxes in the state. The idea of the Headlee Amendment was to protect taxpayers when they might be in a situation where property values were skyrocketing, and in particular compared to the rate of inflation. For most people, your income level is typically going to run pretty closely to inflation. As inflation goes up, often property or income levels are going to go up correspondingly. But if you were in a situation where your property value increased at a rate much faster than inflation, that could take a bigger and bigger piece out of your income because the taxes are directly tied to your property value and its increase. So if you were, for instance, in an area where property values were going up on the neighborhood, let's say 8% in a given year, the millage rate is going to typically be the same. So that means your tax is going to go up at that 8% rate. So this property value goes up, your tax is going to go up. And so what Headlee was trying to do was to protect people. Let's use a scenario. If you had lived in Caledonia decades ago when it was just a farm town and you lived in a just basic house in Caledonia, your property value was at a certain level. But as Caledonia began to become more attractive and expanded, what happens there, of course, is higher demand makes prices go up. And so the value of your property would go up. Well, that might be great if you're going to sell your property, but if you're going to be paying tax on your property, those higher property values mean higher taxes. And so what the Headlee Amendment tried to do for local people, you can see in the two values for property now that we see today on our tax bills, on our property tax bills. Perhaps you've wondered why there are two values on here. This is the case because the SEV value that you would see on your property tax bill stands for state equalized value, and that's supposed to represent a half of your property's value. However, in the Headlee Amendment, a new thing was introduced called the taxable value, and that's the amount at which the property will be taxed. So what the Headlee Amendment said was, if your taxable value is going up of your home, if your home's value is going up, you cannot be paying more taxes at a rate faster than the rate of inflation. So what you have on your tax bill, you will see your SEV, the sort of the true value of your property, will go up, and it will reflect what your property is supposed to be worth. Absolutely. But the taxable value will go up in any given year no faster than the rate of inflation. So if you have a situation where property values in an area are going up, say, 5% in a given year, but inflation only goes up at 2%, the SEV would go up to 5% to show that true increase, but the taxable value would only be able to go up 2%. And so these two numbers, SEV and taxable value, TV, will become different. And the longer you are in your property, typically the wider that spread is going to be. Again, your taxable value can only go up at the rate of inflation, if inflation is super high, then it would only go up at the true rate of increase of the value of your property. But more often than not, inflation will cap that in a growing area like Caledonia. So what that means, though, for school districts, there's another less known element to the Headlee Amendment, and that is an impact on local governments like a school district. Because what the Headlee Amendment similarly said was that if an entity like our school district, if the total property values in the district rise, if that value rises at a rate faster than inflation, they will apply a reduction to the tax collections, which is called a Headlee rollback. What they say is that the revenue for a district can only go up at the rate of inflation. So if property values go up faster than that, you run into a problem. You can't, therefore, keep that revenue at the rate of inflation. Let me show you a scenario to hopefully make sense. So let's say, like we were just talking about a minute ago on a personal level, if the taxable value of all the properties in Caledonia were to go up at a rate of 5%, but inflation was only at 2%, and we plug that into that little equation there, property value up 5%, revenue, though, only up 2%, the millage, in order to get this only to 2%, to get this side of the equation to balance, this, if you remember your high school math, would have to go down. If this is going up 5% on the left, this would have to go down to keep you at like this 2% increase for inflation. I hope that makes sense, but that's what's going on here. So in a growing area like Caledonia, our property values have been going up and up and up. And that's good in some ways, of course, but when it comes to millage rates, it will take down our millage rates. So this can really have an impact on this non-homestead property millage that we are talking about. And of course, this creates a little bit of a dichotomy here, because under Proposal A, a different part of the state constitution, we have to levy the 18 mills to get our full funding for our students. But if the millage is reduced by the Headlee Amendment to the Constitution, we can't levy the 18. And I'll show you how that looks here in just a minute. So when that situation happens, when the rates are reduced by Headlee, we forfeit the amount that corresponds to that reduction. And here's how that's worked in a couple of recent years, the two that I circled on that big chart showing all 30 years of purple bars. In 2018-2019, our total property values went up at a rate faster than inflation. So a calculation was done, and we had our non-homestead rates reduced by 0.1548 mils to make up for the fact that our property values were going up faster than the rate of inflation. Well, what that meant to our district was that we lost $71,300 in revenue that year. The next year, the same thing happened. It is also builds on top of each other. So they reduced it by another 0.2053 mils, as you see here, and now you add those two together, and we were forfeiting 0.36 mils. And that becomes even more important, because now we were losing $186,000 in revenue. So when the last time was that we went out for one of these non-homestead millage renewal elections, the voters of Caledonia approved a request beyond the basic non-homestead authorization. They approved a request to provide a little extra cushion of a 1.8 mils on top of that regular amount to address this issue. And I'll show you here graphically how that works. But just before we look at that, just to let you know that there has been a millage reduction in 6 out of the last 7 years for Caledonia. This is not necessarily the case in every district, but because Caledonia's total property values continue to go up, and that goes up at a rate faster than inflation, we get these millage reductions. So that has happened in 6 out of the last 7 years. The only year it did not happen was a couple of years ago, when the inflation rate for the U.S. was so high that in that particular year, the inflation rate went up faster than the actual value of our properties. So here's what that looks like. This is a 10-year look back here. And so you can see 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, we were levying right at that 18 mil mark, that 18 mil line. And then here are the 2 years where the Headlee rollback kicked in. There's the year we lost $71,000 in revenue. This is the year we lost $186,000 in revenue. And so this was the point at which then that election came, and you could anticipate that this trend was going to continue for Caledonia. And as you can see, in fact, it has. So this was the point at which the voters were asked to approve the millage as a whole, which they did, and then to approve 1.8, which is represented by these bars up here, 1.8 in additional taxation to guard against this pulling down of the millage rate. In other words, enabling us to continue to levy at 18 mils. So you can see that first year, we were able to fill in using a portion of that 1.8 mils and get us back to 18. In 21-22, it got taken down further, so we used a little bit more of the bar. This is still the same 1.8 mil bar, we used more of it. The next year in 22-23 happened again, so we used more of it again. This is the year where inflation kicked in and we didn't have any reduction. But then again, in the current year, it's happened again. We've had a further reduction and again used more of the bar. So you can see over here now, by the year we're in, we are using more than half of that 1.8 extra cushion here to guard against the Headlee rollbacks. And that's important for us as we look to the future. So another point to emphasize here again is we cannot levy ever more than 18 mils. So in theory, no matter how high this bar goes up to the sky, we could not levy more than the 18 mils represented by this red line. So as we look ahead and as we try to anticipate with this new election that we have right now, we need to be able to try and project what the Headlee impact is going to be at the end of the cycle upon which we are asking for this authorization. And of course, as we've talked about, it's essential for our district that we levy the full required 18 mils or we forfeit funds. So we are going to take a deeper look at that in just a moment. If you will move on to part 3 of this series with me, we'll look a little bit more at that as we look in the context of the actual ballot language that will be on the May 6th ballot. So this has been part 2 of a 3-part series. All 3 of these videos are on the non-homestead election tab of our website, calschools.org. And again, I hope you'll watch all 3 to get a complete picture of this topic. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you for watching.